Ladies and gentlemen, greetings and welcome to Let's Talk Theory, the show where we analyze some ideas and hypotheses around our favorite subjects. I'm your host, Zelrix, and today I wanted to celebrate the end of that wonderful year that was 2020 by... Wait a minute, something doesn't sound right. Today I wanted to finish this war pit full of our own blood, sweat and tears of a year that has been 2020 by talking about one of my favorite shows of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender. One of my favorite shows, one of your favorite shows, and a series that stood the test of time and is able to be wonderful for both kids and grown-ups. There are many questions in the Avatar universe that remain unanswered, and today we are trying to answer one of the most controversial. Which element is the most powerful? It's 3 in the morning, what am I even doing here? For this theory, we will spoil Avatar: The Last Airbender, Avatar: The Legend of Korra, and we're gonna talk about some of the comics without mentioning any important plot points. Also, I am one to think that the elements constitute a perfectly balanced magic system. So today's theory will contain a lot of speculation and most importantly, a lot of subjectivity. If you guys have a different answer to this question, please enter it in the comment section down below. And remember that it doesn't mean that I'm wrong or that you are wrong. Both our points might be equally valued. That's why I love the Avatar fandom. Everybody is treated with respect. Meanwhile, other fandoms kill the medium and are more toxic than the Simpsons power plant. I'm looking at you with all my power, Star Wars. So now that this is out of the way, let's talk theory. To deduce which element is the strongest, I've divided this video in 7 main categories. Each category is worth 1 point, and at the end of the day, the element with the most points will be declared the winner. Category 1, Versatility. For the first category, I'd say that fire is the first element to lose. Firebenders are by far the less versatile of the bunch. They are too focused on offensive move and lack defensive move, and most importantly, they lack the ability to react and adapt. I have to take out airbending too. Sure, airbending allows the wielder to be very free of their movement. Unfortunately, the rest of the perks is still a very narrow path. So, between earthbending and waterbending, I think that earthbending is very versatile, capable of building and destroying, but I'll still give the point to waterbending. Waterbenders can heal wounds and sense chi in the body, but the point that cut it for me is the fact that waterbending is so versatile that it can mimic airbending by manipulating water vapor and fog, and it can mimic earthbending with ice bending. In the end, airbending and earthbending will always be more useful to the bender for what they do, but waterbender can approach those skills, and that's why waterbending gets the first point for versatility. Category 2, Accessibility. Unfortunately for waterbenders and earthbender, they are completely out of this one due to the fact that they need to have access to a certain reserve of their own element. Sure, the planet is made of earth and water, but the fact that air is pretty much everywhere and that firebender can generate fire just gives them too much of an edge. Even though scientifically speaking it is supposed to be impossible to generate fire without oxygen, Zuko proves that he can firebend beneath the icy water of the North Pole, proving once and for all that firebender don't need air to firebend. Finally, as mentioned, air is pretty much everywhere. But air being the element of freedom, I feel that it would be easier to restrain an airbender than to restrain a firebender. Something that we actually see in The Legend of Korra. Because they're the only one capable of generating their own element, firebenders get the second point. Third category, Representation. Each element represents something. Air is the element of freedom, fire is the element of power, water the element of change, and earth the element of substance. The question is, out of those 4, which is the most important to have in the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender? I am not trying to be an insensitive jerk, but since we see that the airbenders have been wiped out and that 107 years later the world keeps running normally without them, I have to rule them out. It doesn't mean that they deserve to die, it doesn't mean that freedom isn't important, it just means that in the context in which Avatar takes place, the way of life claimed by the air nomad to be the best clearly wasn't. Then we have to rule out firebending too. Fire is the element of power, but taken too literally, it is their thirst for power that drove both Azula and Ozai to their decline. Plus, when a single human being possesses the power of the four nations, is it really that useful to represent power? The final debate is now between earth and water, change versus substance. We can summarize this by the question, is it better to adapt to change or to make change adapt to us? Not gonna lie, it was a very rough cut to decide. But ultimately, I have to give the point to the Earthbenders. Not because I think standing your ground no matter what is important, but because the method of the Earth Kingdom has been proven efficient. The Earth Kingdom is greater in territory, resources, and citizen than any other nation. There must be a reason for that. And that's also the reason why Earthbenders get the third point. Fourth category, philosophy. We never say it enough, but bending is more than just wielding the element. It is also about your way of thinking, your culture, and your action and thoughts. Earth has a lot to learn from the other element in this category. It is by far the most stubborn element, thus the less likely to open their mind to new potential useful ideas. Then firebending is out too. They are nearly as stubborn as the Earthbender, and they display some idea that has been proven in the real world not to work. Please keep the political debate out of this comment section. So by elimination we have water, the element that will adapt to new idea, and air, the element that detach themselves from worldly concern. The point goes to Airbender here. I swear it's not just because I wanted each nation to have a point. I truly think that the Airbender deserve that point because they detach themselves from the world, helping them understanding every culture objectively, where waterbenders will try to adapt but will keep a part of subjectivity. Subjectivity is not bad, but in these kind of situations it is important to try to stay objective to understand every single point of view. And that's how the Airbenders get the fourth point. The fifth point is combat skills. Which of these four elements is the most useful in combat? Unfortunately, even though they're my favorite element, I need to rule out waterbenders. It doesn't mean that they're the worst, but we have to face the fact. In the show, most of the waterbenders we see facing the Fire Nation are either master waterbenders or very skilled waterbenders, like Katara for example. I feel that both in the show and in a more realistic approach, the lack of access to a nearby water point is a wild card that an apprentice waterbender will have to face. Then I do agree that on paper airbending is the most useful element in combat. But seeing how airbending is more focused on defensive than offensive and on escaping, and airbending where they're back to the wall will always be at a greater disadvantage. Yes, in the show Aang does take down Navy ships and he faces some very experienced firebender. But A, he's the Avatar, and B, he's one of the youngest airbending master in history. Plus, let's not forget that the airbender were wiped out 100 years ago. No one has fought an airbender for the last century. Nobody knows how to face Aang because they were not trained to fight airbenders. This leaves us with fire and earthbending. In my opinion, earthbending is more powerful in an army situation and firebending will be more efficient in a 1v1 combat or any kind of bending duel. I mean, that's probably why the Fire Nation has tanks. Seeing on how we focus solely on the efficiency of the bending in combat and how firebending is depicted in the show more efficient in a duel, more aggressive, more offensive, and most importantly, more dangerous, the fifth point has to go to firebenders. The point that cut it for me is the fact that an earthbender without hurt loses their bending, while firebender once again can produce their own fire. Sixth category, the usefulness in everyday's life. There you go, firebenders out. I mean, firebending can be useful to produce electricity, to light your house, to cook, but face it, in the show the most important problem we see a firebender fix with his bending is Uncle Arrow eating up his tea. For those of you who think firebending is more useful because Zuko can swim through the North Pole's water, when is the last time you actually had to swim through the North Pole water? That's what I thought. Airbenders seems to be able to transport themselves more efficiently. Unfortunately, remember that bending does consume energy and does require a great amount of training. An airbender flying across Ba Sing Se would be as tired as somebody walking, or for that matter, maybe flying is as exhausting as, I don't know, swimming. The greatest advantage of Earthbender are their ability to build things, like the Great Wall of Ba Sing Se. But I'm still gonna give it to the waterbenders. Once again, waterbenders have the ability to mimic the other styles of bending fairly easily. As for the practical aspect of the thing, the North Pole is actually completely operated by waterbending. Seventh and final point, evolution. In the world of Avatar, it is important to be able to evolve very quickly. There are only 7 years between Aang and Korra, and into those 7 decades, we see that the world of the last Airbender that mimic our 16th and 17th century goes to our Industrial Revolution in Legend of Korra. So obviously the elements that can evolve with the change will not be considered for this category because it will be almost ruled out as useless. Airbenders are the nation that lives far from the world, being less likely to evolve. Also, in that time frame, they're pretty much all dead. Even without being dead, it is obvious that they have a big respect of tradition, which is totally fine by me. But the thing is, in this era, the world entered what we call the modern era. And modernity is an amalgam of many things, and one of the most important is the rejection of tradition, along with opening up to the world and the advance of scientific knowledge. Airbenders are just a nation not fitted to live in a modern world. If they had survived, maybe they would have adapted. But the thing is, the core of airbending, detaching themselves from the world, is a big break on the whole evolutionary thing. So we have to rule them out. This is just speculation, but based on what I've seen in the show and what I've read in some of the comics, I don't think the Airbender would have acclimated to this new world. Then, a pretty controversial argument. Seeing how Lightning Generation goes from one of the most perfect form of firebending that only a few firebender can achieve to something that pretty much anybody can do in Legend of Korra, I am tempted to give them the point. But the thing is, if every single firebender can now generate lightning, it doesn't mean that firebending has evolved. It means that it stayed so flat that their ultimate move had become mainstream. The lack of new move and new power in Legend of Korra forces me to think that firebending didn't evolve with the world, and for that reason I have to rule fire out. Now, between earthbending and waterbending, it is a pretty complicated question once again. Throughout the shows, earthbending is a style of bending that discovers the more style of bending, between sand bending, lava bending, and metal bending. But in Legend of Korra, apart from the city of Zaofu and the police metal force created by Toph, metal bending's impact on the world isn't seen that much. Then there's lava bending, but honestly, in Korra there are 2 people capable of it. You would think earthbenders seems to have evolved more than waterbenders in the 7 years between Aang and Korra. And fairly, you would be right, but the question is, how do they use these changes? Kuvira tried to unify the Earth Kingdom with her as the new elected leader. She uses the same method Ozai used, and those methods led to his demise. She is totally power hungry and she disregards the world in which she lives in. At the time of Republic City, the Earth Kingdom can be governed by only one person. Because the world has evolved otherwise, the world is now a political place and Kuvira doesn't accept that. Kuvira just pulled up a Napoleon and made the world regress to the monarchy. I know many of you didn't get my Napoleon joke, but some of you who did study in history, please manifest yourself in the comments. As for the people of Zaofu, the way I understand it, they literally live recluded like air nomad from the rest of the world. So obviously it would be pretty difficult for them to evolve in a world that they're just not a part of. Meanwhile, in Korra, we learn a lot about the Water Tribe political situation. We see that they reunited but stay independent from one another. Most importantly, let's remember that water is the element of change, the element that evolves naturally. Sure, we barely see new waterbending moves in Legend of Korra, but remember the original series. While Toph was discovering metal bending and Zuko was trying to learn how to shoot lightning, Katara was already water, ice, vapor, and ultimately blood bending. From those styles, if you rule out blood bending, every single of them are watching.